This is Anne from Book Carnival. Welcome, all of you. I told Bryan when we were talking prior to all of this that I'm a little overwhelmed to interview him because this is a man who has done everything. And I'm going to just give a brief summary of your background, and then you can correct whatever I've got wrong, okay, when we let you talk. He started off as a mortician's apprentice, went from there to passing the bar exams, becoming a lawyer. He left to pursue a career as a journalist. Did something pretty special about a 1933 gold piece, which should be interesting. And he said, in The Curse of the Double Eagle, he discovered a second coin and exposed the one-of-a-kind sale. He then went on to investigate reptile trafficking, which resulted in a book called The Lizard King, and that is nonfiction. And the National Geographic, The Kingpin, which led to the arrest and imprisonment of several people. From there, he went to Blood Ivory, doing a National Geographic film about the elephants and the horrible things that go on with that. Trafficking Ivory was another National Geographic film that won awards. He's done a little bit of everything along with being an amazing photographer. And what was your role at National Geographic, Bryan?
I founded Special Investigations there, which was an effort to go after wildlife traffic, environmental resource kingpins, criminals.
You've had more careers in one lifetime, and you're still this young, vibrant person who can go on and do so many more things. But we're lucky you've decided to write a book about it. Fictionalized, of course, but you're taking all of these experiences that you've had and bringing them to a novel that we can enjoy.
Well, thank you. I've always expected to end up in fiction, and much of the things you describe are really my effort to get to fiction and to get to storytelling that's dramatic and compelling. So I'm really pleased to finally be here, and I've got some life experiences that I can bring to the page, influence that, but mostly I'm wise enough to offer some stories I hope are worth reading.
Well, definitely. In the company of thrillers, which I'm going to hold up here, and there's one behind you, I noticed. Let's see if I can get this up here. I always go the wrong way. Okay.
You got it.
I got it. This is a hefty book. There's a lot to it. It moves. It's exciting. And as I told you, I didn't finish it on purpose. I didn't want to know the ending before we talked. The reception has been amazing. You've got to be pleased with that.
Yeah, I'm thrilled. We got starred review, and just more exciting is to have people writing me directly and saying what the story means to them, and on a variety of levels, because it was really important to me. I wanted to write a thriller. I like thrillers. I grew up with them. I like the power that they have to deliver a lot of interesting information. And I'm really pleased that it's resonated with people.
Well, your background gives such credibility to what you're writing about.
Well, I do draw a great deal from my own background. That the main character, Tom Clay, is an investigative journalist for a magazine called The Sovereign. Sovereign is a lot like National Geographic. His job is to go around the world investigating wildlife trafficking kingpins. So we share that in common. Clay, as you know, has a second life as a CIA asset. And early in his career, he made a devil's bargain with the CIA. He gets to go to lots of places around the world, and they ask him for certain information. He brings that back. And in exchange, they give him intelligence on the targets that he's going after that enable him to turn his good stories into award-winning stories. And the book opens, he's in Kenya on an anti-poaching operation the CIA is aware of, and his best friend is murdered on that operation, a Kenyan. And Clay pivots from sort of a general journalist who doesn't care to now he cares very much, and he wants to go after who he knows as a South African kingpin operating and is behind that murder. But as he and the CIA offers him an opportunity to go after that guy, and as he proceeds and his investigation unfolds, he realizes the person he thinks is his enemy is not as bad as others, much, much closer to home. And the story is really an exploration for Clay of who he is as a man in America today. And, you know, he's sort of an iconic hero, but who's behind that man? And I wanted to explore that personally as well as for readers. And I also wanted to present a little bit of how the world really works, not sort of your cliche or, you know, just a workable framework that's international. This is the real deal.
Mm-hmm. And it reads that way. You feel the authenticity behind the words and the situations. But we have to clarify, were you CIA? Were you government supported in any way?
I never have been. I was asked that question from time to time, reporting, particularly in Africa. And it was one of the inspirations to take on this story and to make Clay a CIA asset, because people I met couldn't believe that I wasn't. And as I thought about that, it made a lot of sense. You know, for me to do the things I did, to go after the people as bad as they are in countries as unstable as they are, it's hard for people who live in those countries to believe you're not government supported. Mm-hmm. because if they were to do it, they'd be killed. And that's the privilege of that's the story of a Western journalist's privilege. And as I realized how privileged I was, I wanted to tell that too. And by making Clay a CIA asset, I got to explore some of that.
I'm surprised that you felt, I take from that you felt safe, more or less, doing what you were doing. But I'm surprised at that, because we read so much about the ivory and the other things, the poaching that goes on. And these are very dangerous people.
The people involved in ivory trafficking can be and are very dangerous. But for me, what motivated me to do this book was I was seeing, as I took on more and more investigations, I was seeing that in a lot of ways, ivory trafficking or rhino horn trafficking, these animal stories were really just a small part of the bigger story of vulnerable communities exposed to very, very powerful forces well beyond poaching syndicates. I'm talking about, the international surveillance operations funded by American or enabled by American engineers, and international finance, of course, and global mining operations, and these big, big movements that feel too big to do anything about. And that was one reason I left National Geographic, was there were these big criminal efforts that feel they're just big umbrella type things that feel like we are aware of them, but we can't really, how do we address it? How do we even think about it? And I wanted to try to bring that to the page. And that's when I say In the Company of Killers, for Tom Clay, he is surrounded by these big forces that feel faceless and too powerful to do anything about. And so I begin with an anti-poaching operation. So as a technical matter, so that the reader is kind of presented with the stakes. These are life and death stakes, but we move to the bigger, more powerful, very American-based issues and forces that I think people will be able to relate to.
Mm-hmm. As you progress with your character, he gets into more and more situations that he needs help. And how does he find that?
In my experience, I couldn't have done what I did for years without help. And one of the things I wanted to do in this story was share Tom Clay's page with others who are significant. So he opens with his best friend. His best friend is a ranger operating, Kenyan, operating on land that people may associate with the Maasai. It's more familiar to them, that part of Kenya where the elephants are. And that guy is not just a sort of bit player. He is a real friend of Clay. And throughout the story, I wanted to really reflect what it's like for a National Geographic type investigative journalist going around the world. You have friends around the world that are extraordinary and they're on the ground. And Clay has that network. He dated a woman in South Africa who is now a special prosecutor in the government, and she is very concerned with corruption in the South African government, and he reconnects with her after many years, and she's in a different place than they were many years ago, and he's a little slow to realize that. So I enjoyed parsing the real issues of being somebody who's kind of a globetrotter like he is, and his values are his values as well grounded as he thinks they are. And she is a very, for me, effective way of showing how loose and selfish what sounds like, he's got a good moral compass, but only if you look at it in a vacuum. If you look at it compared to her, she stayed in her country and fought real forces, and he just sort of jumps around. He gets to jump around and be a hero in this country and then be a hero in this country, secretly funded or backed by the CIA. No one knows that. So how much of a hero is he, and how much of a hero is he going to be? Because the book presents him with circumstances that he really has to stand up or stand by.
I think you've made him a much more complex character than we normally see in a what do you call a thriller, which gives him so much depth. It's really, we don't see that often.
Thank you. I worked really hard at that. I really thought that, the thrillers are, they get short shrift, I think, they have, my friend Larry Wright is a Pulitzer Prize winner, and an extraordinary New Yorker writer, and he wrote The End of October, which is very popular now on the pandemic and things. Yes. And Larry, right, and everyone loves it. And Larry calls plot a pack horse that you can put information on, and he's talking about nonfiction when he's talking about that. But I see the thriller as that sort of vehicle. We can put really interesting, accurate stuff on the back of a thriller that we can't put on other structures. There's just not enough backbone to carry.
Learn to understand you much better if I can get.
Excuse me, you have to mute yourself, please, when you come in. Okay, sorry, Bryan.
That's okay. So I'm it's one reason that the thriller really matters to me as a genre. It's really exciting to be writing in this space.
But I think it's a different approach than some people have to thrillers, that you want to make it there's depth to it and background and all of that that combines to make it what it is. Not just a thriller, but also something that reaches the heart and mind of people.
Well, I mean, I'm both of, I grew up, my dad was a big thriller reader. And so I grew up, and he and I didn't talk much. My mother was very supportive of me as a writer. I wrote poetry as a kid, and I wrote for her, really. Even before I got into first grade or second grade. But my father and I didn't talk, and I never saw him read. My mom read all the time. My father read once a year. We would go on a family vacation to Maine, and he would bring 2 or 3 Robert Ludlum books or Frederick Forsyth books or John le Carré. And I wanted to communicate with him. And so I would try to read those books, and they always opened too quickly for me. I couldn't follow what was going on. And over time, of course, I was able to process that. And I wanted to write something that sort of celebrated that, harkened back to that in one way, particularly in John le Carré's effort to reach into character, you know, Smiley or Lamus, you know, those guys. It's what's going on internally that makes those books so meaningful. And you know, there's a lot today about the American male, and there's a lot of sort of cardboard cutout versions of the American male being cast about, and I wanted to look behind that. And you know, I know guys who are like Tom Clay, and I wanted to give people a window on what's going on for at least him.
And we don't want to give anything away as we move forward, but he accomplishes a great deal in this particular book. How did you feel about that? And how did you construct it so that it doesn't spoil anything as you went forward?
So thank you. Clay has a trick that he uses that I learned as an investigator early on. And he says to himself, what's the opposite of that? And as a story builder, I will often say to myself, as I'm proceeding in one direction, and I get very satisfied with it, and I think, man, that's good. And then I will take a breath and say, okay, what's the opposite of that? And if that makes me upset, if I find the possibility of rewriting or retelling the story in a way that makes my kind of stomach turn a little bit, then sadly, for me, that's the way I have to go. And I have to start over and do it again until it's as compelling and exciting as I can make it.
And you succeeded very well.
Thank you.
Oh, really. What else do you want to tell us about Clay? Does he have a personal life? Does he have time? Is photography, in your life, photography was a big thing for you, and that's what got you started with the elephants and the ivory.
I was the writer on the projects. It's easy to, the writers are the guys in the background at National Geographic. But yeah, I was the writer on the projects and the lead investigator on the projects for most of the big ivory projects, or for all the big ivory projects. The photographer with me was Brent Sturton, who's an extraordinary award-winning South African photographer. Clay, I wanted to build out Clay's personal life. I wanted people to have a window on what it's like for an investigative journalist. I want people to, you know, in this era of fake news as a phrase in the country whose First Amendment celebrates freedom of the press, to have a phrase like fake news brand a heroic path that I think not enough people take, which is to say to become journalists. You know, journalists they don't have weapons, but they are the front line protecting this country and all of us. And I wanted to bring an authentic, real character. Clay doesn't believe what I just said. I mean, Clay is not a kind of rah-rah journalist. Clay is more hard-bitten. He's had a tougher upbringing. The government has screwed him over. The reason he takes the CIA's deal is not so much avarice as he just thinks, screw the government. They want to give me money. They want to give me this information. I'll take that and I'll run them too. And you know, we all know what happens when you fly too close to the sun, and he experiences that.
Fascinating. At some point, we'll open it up to questions, and I'll have everyone unmute. But before that, I wanted you to give the opportunity to talk about your character as you have in the story itself. How long did it take you to do this book?
I left National Geographic in 2017, and I had started it I was working on it, and I told the people I was at Geographic I was working on it, and I thought I could do both. And this story really overcame me, and so I'm very, very committed to doing what I do 100%. And so I didn't want to have a sort of patchwork. So I said, listen, we'll see what happens down the road, but for now I'm writing novels.
And when you were actively in the field and doing these things that wound up with award-winning documentaries and information, were you gone for long stretches of time, or were you able to come back home frequently? How did that work for you?
So as a journalist, I have had one of the most unique briefs probably in American journalism. My investigations would last 1 to 2, even 3 years, and on a single story. And I put everything into them, and I would be gone 4 weeks at a time, 6 weeks at a time, come back 2 weeks, go out 6 weeks, come back 2 weeks. And so when you read about Clay's life in that respect, where he has a suitcase, inside his door, the door of his home, that he has a couple of suitcases, and they're just really based on climate. And he never really unpacks. He just grabs, okay, this is the Africa suitcase, this is the China in winter suitcase, and they're only they're sort of look like half-eaten sandwiches. They're just sort of clothes in there, and some gear, and he has some universal gear that he takes. But it was an extraordinary life for me as a journalist. And what the beauty of turning to fiction is, people have said, you know, how could you give all that up? And I'm doing all that plus now. These books, this book and the books I'm working on now include all the same level of investigation. I'm still on the road. I am still researching them, but I'm putting the stories that I bring back into the novels. And, you know, one of the things that upset me as a journalist was the criminals got to dictate what story I was telling. Because I'd go after this guy I knew was doing this. And as a result, I'd only get a certain number of pages and a certain amount of space. But when you're in the field, particularly looking at major criminals, you're hearing stories of their connections to banks or oil companies or this government official or this government official's husband or wife. And you can't, the time it would take to prove a single one of those stories out to tell that complete story would take my life.
Mm-hmm.
And but I can do it in a novel, and I can do it novel after novel. And so those guys and those forces should know I'm coming.
All right. So that answered my next question. You're not just sitting in a chair writing books these days. You are traveling and still gathering information for things you're going to be writing.
Absolutely. I mean, the pandemic slowed things down and would have slowed everything down were I a journalist. But independent of that, yeah, no, this is my life. So.
It sounds like the best of both worlds, quite honestly, for you, for the type of thing you like to do.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. And I've gotten married since I left Geographic, and so my world's gotten even better. So, and yeah, it's been really nice.
That's wonderful. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think we should open it up to questions. I'm sure everybody has a lot, and if they don't, I have more. So any of you that want to log on, and Barbara, go for it.
You talked about dealing with criminals and all of this illegal activity and not being really able to pursue legal ramifications. So in your book, how do you balance the criminal aspects and the sort of vigilante justice that you would like with the real rule of law and the official legal result?
Yeah, that's a good question. I worked really hard for this to be an authentic story. So while the forces are big and seem almost surreal, they're real, and they're inspired by forces that are very much at play in the real world today. And Clay is, that's a challenging question for a storyteller. How do you want him to confront these things? And so one thing you'll see in the story is the villain, the ultimate villain, is operating in his own sphere, independent of Clay. And that was a very important technique I wanted to introduce to my thrillers, that it's not a linear, the world doesn't operate in a linear fashion, that the hero is, someone steals the hero or kidnaps the hero's daughter. That's not going to happen to an established investigator on Clay's level. It's just not. But so I wanted to try to capture that. It was a bit of a challenge to say, this is happening over here, independent of you, but here's how it's connected to you. And here's your opportunity to do something about it.
Karen?
You say that you are working on other books. You made it plural right away. Are you continuing with the character, or are you creating complete new scenarios?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Clay is underway on a new adventure as we speak. And that adventure has just been, I'm really anxious. I'm thrilled to to have the book launch and things, but it's surprisingly overwhelming and taking me away from, I really want to get back to this guy because he takes a lot of, he does a lot. And So I'm anxious to be with him. And I do have a couple of stories that I'm almost writing in tandem. So it's pretty exciting for me right now. And that's kind of the discipline, the beauty of having been a journalist and doing these long-term. I had some of the longest stories in Geographic, 10,000 word, 12,000 word pieces. And you have to be able to do that. You have to be able to juggle multiple projects at the same time. And so I'm really pleased that I got some of the discipline that I may not have had earlier.
I wanted to comment just in preparation for our gathering today. I listened to the Trevor Noah interview that he did with you, and it was fascinating. I mean, the whole story, all the different stories that I'm sure are twirling in your head. You mentioned, your inability to really delve into a person or a situation because you were covering a bigger picture. Through your novels, you're going to be able to maybe tell so many of these stories that you have experienced. Now, you've worked very well in the cinema. Will you be doing some, movement in that direction? Do you see Clay, and do you see some of these stories playing a role in a series, in a movie or screenplay of some kind?
Keep talking.
I would love it. I would love it.
Yeah, I think Clay would play pretty well on the screen. And I think, I kept the settings, the number of settings limited. I wanted to have obviously an international, I don't think we get enough authentic international storytelling and involving the intelligence services and American corporations overseas. We don't get enough. And it's because they're hard to tell and it's hard to get that kind of experience. But I have it. And I kept I was mindful of the budgets of Hollywood might want to think about. And I think they're really, it's a nice mix of settings, South Africa, the Philippines, and Washington, D.C. And so we'll see. But if you know anybody, shoot me an email.
You're planning ahead. I like that. Someone else with a question? Please.
Were you able to do any evaluations in Zimbabwe, or was that off limits for you?
No, thank you. Yeah, I've spent a decent amount of time in Zim. We did, the last time I was there, we did a story for National Geographic on lions. And there's a huge property there called Booby Valley Conservancy. And we brought a team in there, and they were very, very good hosts. And so we got to look at, and this is a good example. So I spent a lot of time with them. The question was, is big game hunting, particularly lion trophy hunting, a pro or a con for lion conservation? That was the question I raised this is for National Geographic Explorer, the TV series. And we got to spend a lot of time there. But some of the stories that I heard there that were just fascinating were stories I didn't want to let go of. And so there are some things in the novel that are inspired by that experience.
Yeah.
Were those things that couldn't be included in the National Geographic?
Yeah, I mean, for Geographic, for a criminal investigation, you're kind of, you get to spend a certain amount of time on character, but you really have to get to the actions. And for me, my approach to journalism, I call results-oriented reporting. And what I wanted to do was not just tell a story, not just break a story, but I wanted, the lawyer in me wanted to change things, impact change, real change. And Geographic was the platform I chose to do it because it's internationally well-known and respected. But the only kind of story I would be involved in was one where I got to tell all the elements of a story necessary to effect change. So I would identify the villain. I would identify the species that's endangered. I would identify the laws and the regulations that were being broken or manipulated. I'd tell you the government official who was corrupt, and I'd have their name in the story. And I'd look at the demand side and say, these are the people who are buying this. Mm-hmm. This is how it's happening. And these are the customs. This is how customs, all of those elements I tried to include in my story so that if you read my story, you could say, I'm not going to do anything, but you couldn't say ever, I didn't know. And as a result, we got Vatican City in Italy raided by the police authorities there because of the ivory I reported on there. We had a pedophile in the Philippines defrocked and exposed because of this story. I named him. And we had a corrupt government official in Malaysia, her offices raided. And that's the sort of storytelling that mattered to me. And what enabled me to do this was I didn't care enough about my career. Mm-hmm. If you told me as my editor, you can't do this, I'd say, see you later. I'm going to write this story anyway. And I'll go live there and get this story and I'll sell it to somebody else. What matters to me is I take on issues that really, really matter to me personally, but I think matter to the general public, and worked really hard to bring them back and tell them in a compelling way. And I'm hoping that my book, this first novel and the novels to come, continue to resonate with people, and trust that you can trust me that I wouldn't be bringing it to you if it didn't matter.
Who's winning? Who's winning?
Who's winning?
Yes, the bad guys are outrage and justice.
Well, that's a good question. It's case by case. But right now, certainly, you can ask yourself, how do you feel? Who's winning out there? I feel like we're all in the company of killers at some level. There are forces out there that feel too big to do anything about, mm-hmm. and we need to put faces on them. The one thing that Clay's father taught him early on is there's always a who. Someone is responsible. And that's one of Clay's motivating and my motivating questions is who mm-hmm. is behind this. And you can't solve global warming in one shot, but you can say this guy is responsible for this act, and that's a problem. And what am I going to do about it?
Yay.
And in this way, you've got Clay being able to do that and be able to expose things. And you've indicated there's another book with Clay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. What else is on the horizon?
Well, I've spent a lot of time in organized crime scenarios. As you know from my interview with Trevor Noah, my mentor is my uncle, who was an FBI undercover agent. Mm-hmm. And Trevor made a big joke about that. But between the two of us, we have some pretty powerful stories. And he introduced me to a lot of the guys that he was against. And I met those people on both sides of the law and became very, very close to a number of them. And they have let me into worlds that I think people would want to read about.
It sounds wonderful. Going back a little, for one thing, if any of you have not watched this program that Lilia mentioned for Trevor Noah, it's amazing. And I think I put a link in an email I sent out to a lot of people. This program is recorded, so you can come back to this later to find out about it. In Clay's case, you have an open venue where you can bring all of these things in, because he can go to different places and deal with different situations, not just the animal or ivory trafficking or the other things that you can delve into the politics a little more. Okay.
Yes, more than as a journalist, I can. So lawyers would never let me, and no reasonable editor would let me get in, the politics of the we really need to be pretty focused to get your story on the page. But the criminal enterprises that I reported on wouldn't exist without an umbrella of corruption, and the power imbalances that exist around the world. And those are things that, we get kind of news clips on, but to be able to spend some time in a story and experience that imbalance, that the question about Zimbabwe, for example, to spend a little time and see how people on the ground are actually interacting with their government was something I wanted to explore.
And Clay can do that, where you were not able to a certain extent. You have more freedom with letting Clay.
That's right. That's right.
Annoy people or irritate them or whatever it takes to get to where he wants to go.
Yeah, Clay is much more, he's willing to compromise the people around him more than I was. But he's on the spectrum of what it takes to be an investigative journalist. And so yeah, he's able to do some things and interact with people that I certainly wouldn't include in a story. One of the things that really made me want to leave journalism for fiction was an experience I had in Mozambique and South Africa. I was reporting on rhino horn trade there and the killing of rhinos in Kruger National Park and on the Mozambique border. And I got word that a law enforcement official wanted to speak with me, but he was very nervous about it. And so I told him what hotel I was staying in. I had to have the blinds drawn. He didn't park his car in the hotel parking lot. The meeting almost blew up when he came in and saw that my laptop was open, and he thought maybe I was trying to film what was going on, and I wasn't. But he was terrified of a very powerful guy operating there. And this guy has been celebrated around the world as a leading light in, I'll say conservation, but a leading light in his business is celebrated as one that is great for communities and great for and he is in fact a very, very bad guy who's murdered people. He's trafficking in diamonds. He's done all kinds of bad things, but nobody knows about it. And were I to write about it, he's been celebrated in magazines I'm very familiar with. And were I to write about that, well, I couldn't write about it until I could prove it. And I didn't think I could prove it without some people possibly losing their lives. There was no way for me to get from where I was to where he was without it being obvious how I got there. So that's the sort of thing that I can do in a novel. I can go after a guy like that and a circumstance like that. And the idea is to empower people. If what you're reading makes you upset or makes you feel like, oh, I want to know more about this, then I not only do I want you to be entertained, but I want you to say, you know, I didn't know this about the world.
Yes. Yeah, it's important. Going back to the question about possible film or TV, did you have anybody in mind for Clay?
Do I have anyone in mind for Tom Clay? I'm saying that out loud because my wife is now going to be, she's now very excited. We've kicked that around a lot, so I'm going to leave that. I'm going to leave that off the table for now. But
okay, we'll talk about that next time.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. Do we have any more questions from anyone? Do you want to tell us a bit about your second book, the one that's coming up, and when is it due out?
So these are questions that I don't move into the next. I'm too much the criminal investigator to reveal anything about what I'm doing.
Okay, we'll let you be very secretive, which brings us back, of course. We'll be dying for the next interview.
Oh, I've really enjoyed this so far, so I'll be delighted to see you again.
Okay. Can you give us a timing of when the next book might come out?
You know, I don't know. I'll tell you that this book was delayed because last year was such a big, the election absorbed everything. So we made a strategic decision to delay it a year. I was done some time ago.
Okay.
So I suspect if it can be sooner than you might guess.
All right. You're going to leave us in suspense, in other words.
That's like my genre.
I can't think of a better way to end this. If no one else has any questions, we're getting a bit of an echo because everybody's on again. I really appreciate your time. I couldn't wait to talk to you, but I was also nervous about it because you have done all these thrilling things, and I wanted to everyone to hear about it and know. The book is wonderful. I highly recommend it. Again, it's The Company of Killers. And there we go. Don't forget, Bryan Christy has a lot to say in here, and you'll enjoy every word of it. Bryan, thank you so much for spending time with us, and I expect us to do this again for the next book.
I promise. And then thank you very much.
Hopefully in person, much more effective.
That would be great.
Yes. Thank you so much. Bye
Thank
now.
you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for entertaining us.